it results in a common understanding of the necessity. And that is, I mean, this is really easy to say, but really, it's really hard. I mean, it really is hard to do. It really is hard to do.
That's actually something I was going to ask you. I mean, were there particular mechanisms that you implemented that supported your PMs in finding the right problems, or interfacing with, let's say, the active duty military to help suss out what the underlying problems were?
Well, I'll give you an example of one, and they're not, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, they're pretty pedantic, really. I've been in DARPA a couple times, and the first time I was in DARPA was in the early '80s, and so I used to go to exercises that we would have. And I would go and I just would wander around. There were these major exercises, the Air Force and Army and all, and I would wander around just listening. And I came back one day and told my guys, I said, I now know what the problem is. I said, I have wandered around this exercise for a couple of days, and the question that I hear being asked constantly is, where are you? Now, this is not the threat, okay? We knew where the threat was. You know, there were all kinds of sensors finding where the threat was. What they didn't know is where the soldiers were. So they would get on phones, and the guy would make a report or something, and the first question out is, where are you? And a lot of times the guy would say, well, I'm by the big rock, I'm by the big rock. Well, what big rock? And they would get out maps and try to figure out where the hell the guy was. But this turned out to be the major problem in these exercises. And it was, that, okay, we know where the enemy is, but to do anything about it, we need to know where we are so we can concentrate. These are all the things that the military does. But the major question was, where are you? Okay? So I came back and I told my guys that, hey, and also, by the way, GPS, the satellites were were enough on orbit that you could do something about them. And there was a guy who had a GPS backpack. Now, this was a huge backpack, actually. And one guy wore it, and it would take him 20 minutes to get a fix. Mainly because, it was one satellite at a time, and so it would take him 20 minutes to get a fix, and finally he would get a fix, and he would know where he was. But that didn't help, So you'd know where the guy with the backpack was, but it didn't answer the question of where was everybody else. So I came back and I explained this, and I told my guys, look, and this is sort of like, this is a major problem. The major problem is that what we have to do is to get that backpack this guy has and shrink it down. Shrink it down, and first of all, make it be faster, and shrink it down so that every soldier can have one. Now remember, this is 1982, okay? So we got to shrink it down so that soldier, every soldier has one of these, and therefore, we can find out when we say, where are you? We know the guy knows where he is, and he can communicate what he is, and maybe he can just transmit where he is. I had no idea. Did anybody here, like the program managers I had, I was an office director at that time. I will fund anybody who has any ideas in this. Well, I had a guy who was developing. He was queer on gallium arsenide. Okay, I mean he was really promoting gallium arsenide. I remember the early '80s, mm-hmm. And so he knew that in order to get money out of me, he had to have some application. It was he was getting money for developing the technology, but in order to get real money, he had to have some reason for doing this. So he came to me and he said, "Look, that backpack, I can make it what you want. How big do you want it to be?" And I smoked at that time, and I smoked Marlboros, and I put my Marlboro pack out, and I said, I want it to fit inside this cigarette pack. You know, I want it to fit inside that cigarette pack. Everything. Okay? Well, he went off, and he came back in a couple of weeks, and he says, I can't make it fit in your Marlboro cigarette pack. I said, well, okay. You know, so that, you know, being somewhat of an asshole, I said, well, that ends that, right? He said, no. We had a secretary who smoked Virginia Slims, okay? And I don't know, none of you guys probably know any of these because smoking back in those days was more prevalent than it is now. But Virginia Slims was a cigarette that was longer, okay? So the cigarette pack had a form factor of being maybe an inch more in length, and you know, and he said I can fit, because he actually went and did a little bit of a design on how to get the battery, you know, and all of that in there. I can fit it into this Virginia Slim pack, and I said okay. So we started a program called the Virginia Slims program. Okay. 6 years later. Now I asked him, by the way. I said, well, why do you think okay, that's great. But why do you believe you can solve the problem? He says, look, let me tell you about gallium arsenide. The difference between gallium arsenide and silicon, and that's what this backpack was made out of, is that the noise figure of gallium arsenide is about 4 dB less than it is in silicon. Okay? He said that 4 dB, less noise figure, allows me to see signals to the signal-to-noise ratio that I need 2 or 3 times further than the silicon can. So with my gallium arsenide, I will be able to see multiple satellites simultaneously. Yeah, and therefore really reduce the time to get it fixed. The other one, the guy was doing it, a satellite at a time. I said, oh, okay. And he, and he said also that there's a power thing and so forth. But the major thing was he had gallium arsenide. Major trait was a noise factor, and that was for this application. So we went and did it. 6 years later. And here's the other thing, is that these things take time, okay? And nobody had ever done this before. And the way DARPA does things, we went out and advertised, hey, we're looking for solutions to this problem. We were careful not, and then we would give an example. We believe the gallium arsenide, and we had a lot of people come and bid on it, and there were a lot of them, like Rockwell Collins and all that. 6 years later, and $60 million later, which doesn't sound like a lot of money now, a chipset was developed that allowed a capability on the size of a cigarette pack. It was actually a little bit bigger than the Virginia Slim thing, to be able to find a fix using GPS in really a rapid amount of time. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and that started the whole industry. Now, let me tell you, that I would. Yeah, and here's the whole thing. So we had a problem that we were going to solve. This is a military problem. We were going to make sure every soldier had one of these, okay? And therefore, and of course, since you had it, you could have communications. This is all something that just happened, okay? On top of being able to find it, and it started the industry that we now have today. Because once we had that capability, the problem was that the way the answer would come back to somebody would be in a coordinate system, which was you had to really had to be a geek to really kind of understand the coordinate system. It wasn't a natural coordinate system. So, but people said, well, what if I make maps? What if I were to have a map, and now I could have this thing, once it knows its GPS location and whatever it is, I could go and find what that equivalent is on this map, and I could send the information on the map. And the rest is history. That is it. All of the people that went out, a lot of companies then went out and started developing this, and taking maps. We said, way back in the beginning, we said to ourselves, Hey, I wonder if there's any commercial application on this. And I wish someday if I ever write a book, I'm going to pretend like I really knew that it was going to revolutionize the world, as it has. When you think of it, your phone today has that chipset. Better, it's been changed and the technology is better. But that chipset that was started way back in 1982, because I came and I said, here is the problem that we need to solve. Okay, it all came from that. And we thought about, hey, you think there's any commercial use of this? Remember? Well, yeah, maybe hikers will want it. Yeah. It probably has a market for hikers or something like that. But it was the guys who now had this capability who also knew how to get the maps in electronic form, create flat, and marry those technologies. So what we did is we had the solution to this other problem, which was, I got these maps, how the hell do I know where I am on them? And people, that's where all of this came out of, okay? So that's an example, but it's a major example when you think of the impact on the world of this. Now, the impact even went more than that from a military viewpoint. Cruise missiles, okay? Cruise missiles that we had, which we were going to fire long distances, they didn't know where they were, and so what they had to do to find the target is that when they came, because they were usually being fired and traveling over ocean. Okay? So you had to fire them in a way that they came over some geographic landmarks. I mean, literally mountains, and you really now had to find. You were constrained to finding mountains that you could actually. You knew what this profile would look like. And so inside that cruise missile, there was a matching that went on between, okay, I'm here because this profile is the profile you get it when you fly over this mountain range at this angle and all that. So we had all of the mapping people we had, the DMA at that time is what they were called. They were developing these answers. They were developing. They were doing the maps, but now they also were the ones that went and found map structures that if you flew over them were pretty unique, and that constrained how the cruise missiles were used. Okay. Well, another guy at DARPA at that point, this had just happened, the chipset and all that happened. He went and said, "Hey, you know what? I can solve your problem. We can put this GPS thing in your cruise missile. It's so fast that it is updating so rapidly that this will give you where you are constantly, and you no longer have to find a geographic structure, but you do need to know where the target is in GPS coordinate system." Well, the Air Force, and the mapping people fought it because they had a way of doing business, and we were disturbing that way of business. But finally, it was so obvious that it could work, and it worked, obviously. So there was an application that we hadn't really thought about or known about when it was to solve the problem of knowing where the guy was, and that started that whole industry of being able to find locations on the Earth and get them expressed in GPS coordinates. Okay, and so that's probably one of the. And I got lots of other examples, but that's the one that I think you can relate to because in your life you are using the result of that. But it all came from me going to places where they were exercising, not getting hung up and just listening, just walking around listening, and say, you know what? The question I hear being asked almost all the time is, "Where are you?" And it was, but coming back and saying,